The importance of supply chain consulting to real estate brokerages these days is the topic of my conversation with Joe Dunlap. He is Managing Director of the Supply Chain Advisory with CBRE. Hi, Joe. How you doing?
Well, thank you. Hi, Bob.
Thanks for being with me today. So what exactly does a real estate brokerage firm need with a supply chain consulting business anyway?
The way most companies go about making decisions for their supply chain, how many facilities do they need? Where do those facilities need to be? The role that the facilities play, whether it's manufacturing, packaging, distribution, or multiple roles. How many people are in those facilities? And what's the business case are really paramount before the real estate decisions can be engaged upon.
So what might be some top site selection considerations for companies these days? I mean, I know that there are changing trends in the world of supply chain as it relates to real estate. What's top of mind right now?
Sure. Most companies are thinking about the top of mind for real estate decisions. There's a number of questions that they have to answer before they get to specific site selection. So when they're thinking about the total logistics cost, logistics being made up of inbound and outbound transportation costs, and that cost itself being sometimes 50% or more of their total logistics spend, relative to real estate, usually being somewhere between 3 and 6%. The drivers for site selection go through a sort of a funneling effect from transportation, another big rocks like labor and inventory carrying costs, and then real estate. Those analyses tend to drive companies from their big questions down to markets. Yes, I need 3 facilities. I need one on the West Coast, one in the Northeast, and one in the Southeast. Specifically, maybe I need one in Atlanta, one in Pittsburgh, one in Los Angeles. Now go through the site selection criteria, looking at other micro trade-offs within that transportation zone of indifference that says, within that 50, 100-mile radius, what's the trade-off between labor availability, quality, and wage targets of certain demographic requirements for labor? What are the trade-offs of available properties that meet my criteria if I need a certain size or clear height or other specifics of refrigerated building, et cetera? What's available within that zone of indifference, and then look at those trade-offs for the site selection process.
Also determines, I guess, whether you need to go with a greenfield site or occupy an existing building.
If there's an existing building that may need they're referred to as tenant improvements to modify the building to meet your specific need for using it. Or if there's nothing available or under construction in your horizon when you need that building, perhaps you need to go down the build-to-suit path where you acquire the property and contract with a developer to build that building specific to your needs.
We know that transportation costs are going up pretty steeply these days. Is that the same with real estate costs? What's the relationship between those two?
So yes, transportation costs, I think, probably more in the news than they've ever been in my career. Clearly, there's been an increase in ocean freight, 250% or more. In some cases, 300 or 400% more this time last year. Ground transportation is probably up in the neighborhood of 40 to 50%. Air freight's probably up 15% year to date this time last year. And real estate in general is approaching 9.7% nationwide. In certain markets, it is higher. Other markets, it is lower. It's really just a supply and demand equation, just like transportation. But relative to transportation costs, real estate usually requires about an 8 to 10% increase in real estate costs to equal 1% increase in transportation costs. So the priority by which most companies think about those trade-offs, usually there is a primary focus on transportation costs first to narrow that funnel, as I was describing a moment ago, before trying to figure out within that zone of indifference, what's the relative real estate opportunity.
And the implications for occupiers must be pretty extreme and intense given these rising costs these days, right?
Absolutely. Occupiers are struggling with needing space in a certain time window, and there's no space available. Yeah,
there is a real serious shortage of warehouse space right now nationwide.
It sounds ironic in a way, because the demand profile for real estate this year versus the same period last year is also up quite significantly. 3PLs in general have been the largest consumers or users, occupiers of real estate space for probably 10 plus years or more every year. And in 2021, they've been about 25% of the total consumption, if you will, of industrial real estate space.
Do you see a domino effect in terms of, like, you take the congestion that's going on at the seaports, especially in Southern California, and the other end, the congestion that's going on at inland rail yards and the like? Does that mean more stuff is flowing into warehouses, or does it have, what relation does that have on how full warehouses are, shortage of warehouses, need for more? Is it all part of the same big problem?
It's certainly all connected. There are relationships in that every piece of the supply chain is almost, in a way, a what's the right word for it? I'm trying to think of a constraint. So each node in the supply chain is a constraint. Ocean freight delays, constraint. Unloading at the port, constraint. Enough drayage drivers, enough chassis, enough containers, constraint. Warehouse availability, constraint. The relationship of those constraints are somewhat independent of one another, and also dependent upon one another. When freight is coming in, all of a sudden we have just loads and loads of containers coming in and no available space. Where does it go? It sits on the yard, and we see detention, demurrage charges result from that.
Also, thanks to the world of e-commerce and the omnichannel, it seems like what constitutes a warehouse today is something a little bit different, or maybe even quite different, in terms of size, in terms of location, in terms of what's going on in the four walls of that facility. Do you see changing trends there?
Absolutely. We've been seeing those trends shift for the last few years relative to omnichannel, e-com, direct-to-consumer, and omnichannel, particularly within the back room of the store. And the pandemic really supercharged that change, where the need for buy online, pickup in store, buy online, curbside, and also being able to deliver locally out of that store to local consumers in a timely fashion, primarily to create speed and to reduce cost. But I think in the future we'll continue to see more and more changes in this same vein, where we may even see the future of more office spaces become inventory nodes in the supply chain for distributing office supplies, or distributing, to apartment buildings in a downtown metro area out of a office building or a multi-family building that has one level or one room and one level designated for certain types of inventory to deliver to consumers quickly.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, and stores becoming, in some cases, or malls becoming dark stores, so you're getting that
there
type
have been
of use?
We have a report we've published about a year or two ago that described about 60 different projects of retail conversions where retail space had been converted specifically for industrial. So to answer your question about dark stores, yes, absolutely, we're seeing that.
Joe, thanks very much for enlightening us today about these big trends that are going on in supply chain and real estate. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate
You're welcome. Thank you.
I've been speaking with Joe Dunlap of CBRE. Thank you very much for watching.